Today we're going to be talking about every team's worst draft selection. The cool thing about this, well, there's a few cool things. One, some teams just had really good drafts, so their worst pick might not even be a bad pick, if that makes sense. But based on the amount of draft picks they had, maybe they just drafted really well as a whole, so their worst pick could be a good pick, but it has to be the worst one of the bunch that they did have. So I hope that makes sense. So this isn't just, oh, this pick's going to be a bad player, this guy's not going to work out, but it might be the worst pick of the picks that they had. The other fun part about this is we get to see how I'm wrong or right a few years down the line based on how these teams develop the talent. There are some teams that, in my opinion, don't draft particularly well, but they're so great at developing the talent that they did draft that it looks like they drafted amazingly. So that's another fun thing about it. So we get to go ahead and look at all these different things, and let's talk about the worst pick for every single team. It does suck to do the worst draft pick by every team. That's why I'm also doing the best draft pick from every team. That video is going to be uploaded on the channel a little bit later, either today or tomorrow, so make sure you're subscribed. Scroll down, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss that video. Reminder to hit that subscribe button again if you're not subscribed already. We're gaining so many subscribers recently. Everybody's hopping on the bandwagon, and you're welcome to. I have a lot of room, so please hit that subscribe button. Let's talk about the Cowboys. Worst first-round pick, or worst pick in the draft, excuse me. In my opinion, and you could honestly go in between probably Chauncey Golston and Nahshon Wright, I'm going to lead towards Nahshon Wright here in the third. He is a longer cornerback. He's got good length, long arms, tall corner, decently athletic, not much of a technician. Really early to take him in the third round. Just wasn't a big-time fan of it. I know he fits Dan Quinn's defense with the length that he loves at corner, but just not really a huge fan of the player being taken in the third round. The Giants, my favorite team, of course. Again, I know the name is misleading to all you new viewers. I am a Giants fan, and I think the Giants drafted very, very well, so it's a little bit tougher to find their worst pick. I think probably it's in between these last three. Ellerson Smith I like as a player, but rotational edge guy. Gary Brightwell probably takes a cake, but the Giants don't have a lot of running back depth, so he might end up playing quite a lot as a pretty athletic, bigger back. Rodarius Williams, just because the Giants have a lot of cornerback depth, I think I'd have to lean towards Gary Brightwell, but overall, I don't think the Giants really made a bad pick. These were all solid selections, and Gary Brightwell is the biggest question mark just based on his talent, but the Giants don't really have running back depth, so he's someone that's probably going to see a lot of snaps within the first couple years of his career. So Gary Brightwell, but I think the Giants drafted really well, so a little bit unfair. The Philadelphia Eagles are another team where it's pretty unfair because I think they drafted very, very well. You could say maybe Teron Jackson, not a guy they particularly needed as a breakout player for Coastal last year, won Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year. I honestly think you could say maybe Landon Dickerson's the worst pick just because they really did need to focus on center at that spot. Probably would have been better off taking cornerback, but Landon Dickerson, I think, can compete for that starting left guard spot right away and replace Jason Kelce. As long as he stays healthy, Landon Dickerson's going to be an absolute beast. It's kind of tough. I'm going to say maybe Teron Jackson. Washington football team is a team that I think also drafted really, really well. The NFC East, I think, in general did very well. But to me, John Bates out of Boise State in the fourth round, it's just a little bit too early to take him. I understand needing tight end. That is kind of a need for Washington football team as their starting tight end, who's good in Logan Thomas, converted quarterback, is good but older. Breakout season came pretty late in his career based on his age, but John Bates in the fourth round just isn't good value. That's way too early to take him. He probably would have been there talent-wise, 6th or 7th round, maybe even priority undrafted free agent. Once again, another team that, in my opinion, drafted really, really well. The Jets took an interesting approach where they were just loading up on offense, giving Zach Wilson so much different talent. But to me, the worst pick for this Jets team was probably Jamien Sherwood. I've heard rumors that he's going to play linebacker, but I love their draft overall. They did a good job getting big athletes, taking chances on them late in the draft. But Jamien Sherwood, to me, was just probably, again, a little bit early to take him. I know it's a 5th round, but wasn't super high on him at the top of the 5th. But again, they drafted really well. I don't think it's a terrible pick. The New England Patriots are also a team that, in my opinion, drafted really, really well. The Pats did fantastically, and they're a team that usually doesn't draft super well. They just have a bunch of picks, so they end up hitting on a few of them, and their coaches are so good at developing talent that doesn't really even end up mattering who they draft at all. But to me, their worst pick was probably Will Sherman. They just drafted really well. I can't hate on any of these top picks. I don't think Mac Jones was good value at 15, but he would have been taken like shortly after that. So I understand having to take Mac Jones at 15. I'm not in love with him as a player, but I think he's going to be very good because he's on the Patriots. Just kind of what happens. The Patriots offensive scheme with a smart QB like Mac Jones is going to be really beneficial for him developing. But I love the draft overall. I would say maybe Will Sherman's the worst pick just because they have a lot of good offensive linemen already and depth already as well. But again, it's hard to find a bad pick with this draft. The Bills are another team that I think drafted pretty well, and they took some chances. Like, I think Gregory Rousseau stands out as their biggest chance on a player because they did so in the first round, and Rousseau has a long way to go. But I think the Bills are the right team to develop him. They've got great coaches and have been able to develop defensive line talent in the past. Spencer Brown's another big athlete they took a shot on, but I love the chance in the back end of the third round. I think their worst pick was Rashad Wildgoose. Super fun name. In my opinion, not a draftable player. Just, I know they need cornerback. I'm not sure Wild Goose is the right guy to get the job done. And how is the NFL going to let a Wild Goose play on the field? The Miami Dolphins were a team that had so many high picks in the draft and drafted really, really well. Their worst pick to me, I know guys want me to say Hunter Long, but if they're running 12 personnel, Hunter Long can definitely get in there as the second tight end, like pretty much immediately. I like Shaheen as a backup tight end for the time being. I think their worst pick was Jared Dokes just because they didn't really need him. They have whatever running backs on the team right now. I get that. Like, I'm not a huge Myles Gaskin guy. I'm not a huge Salvin Ahmed guy. They got the job done, but they don't really need Jared Dokes. If you're going to get another running back, just get a UDFA, and there were some good ones that were not drafted. Minnesota Vikings, another team that drafted really, really well, so it's tough to find a particularly bad pick with this Vikings team. I'm not a huge fan of Chaz Surratt in the third round just because he offers almost nothing in run defense. I know, like, the tackle numbers stack up. You can't look at tackles. You can't look at sacks. Watching the box score is not a good way to evaluate a player. But I don't think Chaz Surratt was the worst pick. I think the worst pick was taking Kene Nwangu in the fourth round. I know Vikings fans have the idea in their head that he's going to be this all-pro returner that won't fumble the ball or do anything, and I know they view him as a returner. The fourth round is too early to take an athletic return guy that offers you pretty much no other value. This is not a guy who's even close to as good as Alexander Mattison. It's just too early for that type of a player. I love the Lions draft overall, so it is, again, tough to find a particularly bad pick with this unit, with this draft class, but Jamar Jefferson in the 7th, I don't know. I just think he's going to play the smallest impact of any of the players that they drafted. I love the draft class, so I like Jamar Jefferson as a player. I think the 7th round is good value for him, but I just don't see him playing the biggest impact, especially when there were some good UDFA running backs, and they already have some solid backs on the roster. I don't know what Jamar Jefferson does for you. Under the same type of philosophy as well, the Packers are a team. I was a little bit too harsh for their draft grade. On second glance, it is better than I initially thought, especially with Elton Jenkins probably sticking at guard now and Josh Myers developing as that next starting center. They did pretty well overall. Their worst pick to me was Kylan Hill, and it isn't bad value for him in the 7th round. Just you didn't really need to draft a running back. I don't think Kylan Hill is going to play the biggest role for them, especially when they re-signed Aaron Jones. They drafted A.J. Dillon in the 2nd round last year. Why take Kylan Hill? But again, they drafted pretty well, so it's tough to find a particularly bad pick. I was harsh on their draft grade. I think it's probably a B, not a C+. This one feels rude because I love the Bears draft as well, and I keep saying that about a lot of these teams, but I think so many teams this year drafted really, really well. The Bears killed it. Their worst pick, it's tough to find. I love Kairos Tonga. I think Thomas Graham in the 6th is awesome. I think Daz Newsome in the 6th is awesome. I think Khalil Herbert could be a really good change of pace back to David Montgomery. I think he's a better pure running back than Tariq Cohen's more of a gadget player. To me, their worst pick's probably Larry Borum, and I don't even dislike him as a player. The 5th is pretty good value for him. It's just, who's the worst pick? Probably Larry Borum, but I don't even think he's bad, and I don't even think that's bad value. He's just probably the worst pick because they got so many steals and such great value and so many good players. Bears killed it. But Larry Borum's the worst, I guess. Also, I'm not sure if you can tell. I feel like I'm kind of lispy and my tongue's getting in the way when I'm talking. I bit my tongue and there's like a gash on the right side, so it's a little bit tough to talk. I'm pushing through it. Hopefully I don't sound like too much of an idiot. I'm sure the only way I sound like an idiot is with the takes that you disagree with. Haha. Browns drafted really, really well. Really, really well. Who was their worst pick to me? I wasn't a huge fan of Anthony Schwartz just because I think it's too early for a guy that is just fast right now. But in the way that the Browns could use him, which is as a screen guy and as a big-time deep threat, it's really not the worst. I think their worst pick is probably Tony Fields. He's just kind of an all-or-nothing type linebacker. I think his impact is going to be on special teams, but they drafted so well. I love so many of their picks. Who's the worst of them? Tony Fields, maybe. It's hard to find a bad pick with this Browns draft class. However, it's not particularly hard for me to find the worst one with the Ravens. Another team I think drafted fairly well overall. I didn't like Brandon Stevens in the 3rd round at all. It's a converted running back to play corner, and they want to play him at safety. It's just a lot to ask of a guy who's a decent athlete, but you're really banking on developing him as a player. In the 3rd round, I think it's too early to take a shot on a guy like that. The Steelers are another team who got a lot of talent in the draft. I think people think I hate Najee Harris as a player because they didn't see my pre-draft coverage. They just saw my reaction to the pick for the Steelers. Najee Harris was my best running back in the class. So I like him going to the Steelers. They needed a running back. Just thought it was more important for them to address other positions like center and like tackle. Everyone keeps saying when I'm talking about interior offensive line, I mean guard. David DeCastro does get injured and is getting older to the end of his contract, but I know Kevin Dotson's a guard, but they need center and they need tackle pretty badly. Wasn't really addressed until the 4th round. I think Dan Moore's fine. Pat Freiermuth taking a tight end in round 2. I know he's going to impact the run game. I didn't love it as a pick just because they took 2 less impactful positions on offense. However, their worst pick to me was Isaiah Loudermilk. Didn't really view him as a draftable player, and he went in the 5th before Quincy Roche, who I think is a really, really good player in the 6th round. Loudermilk is going to fit the defense really well at basically that 5 tech, maybe 3-4 defensive end. Think Stephon Tuitt backup type player, but it was just too early for him. I didn't really think he was going to get drafted. I think a lot of guys were down on the Bengals draft, and I think it's a little bit harsh. The Bengals, in my opinion, did pretty well. Their worst pick was maybe Jackson Carman, just because they're converting him to guard when he isn't really a guard, played tackle at Clemson, and they took him at number 14 overall in the 2nd round, or 46 overall, 14th in the 2nd round. Just a little bit early for a guy that you're converting and banking on your ability to develop him as a player. I don't hate it. I don't really think it's a terrible pick, but I do think based on the rest of the class, it is the worst one that they had. Maybe Chris Evans, just because they really didn't need another running back, especially an athletic guy, that they have better players there right now. I don't know. It's really not a bad draft class. Carman is probably a little bit of a reach, especially playing a new position. People are hating on the Saints draft. I'm going to tell you for their worst pick, there's no shot I'm making it Peyton Turner. I like him a lot as a player. Maybe a little bit of a reach, but based on his athletic upside, if you're going to take Rousseau at 30, Peyton Turner at 28 makes a ton of sense. So Peyton Turner, I like his upside. Pete Warner, I don't think is a bad pick. Paulson Adebo is great. Ian Book in the 4th. I know you need backup quarterback. Ian Book in the 4th round simply cannot be it. I know you need backup quarterback, but not super high on him as a player. I think he probably is worth a 6th or a 7th round pick. Probably would have gone earlier because he plays QB, but I just don't love Ian Book as a player in the 4th round. It seems early. The Carolina Panthers crushed the draft, so it is tough to find their worst pick as well. It really is. I think maybe you have to go down to Thomas Fletcher just because he's a long snapper, but Phil Hoskins in the 7th, they didn't really need him. I don't know. It's tough. It's tough for me to advocate for drafting a long snapper, period. But if he's going to be your starting long snapper for 20 years, the way some of these guys play, there are worse picks you could have made. So just Phil Hoskins, I think he's going to play the least impact on this team. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers were a team that really didn't even need to do that much in the draft just because they kept every meaningful player, every meaningful free agent on their team. And the Bucs aren't a team that killed the draft or anything. They didn't have a ton of bad picks or a ton of great ones. They just did pretty well, middle of the pack draft. Their worst pick, maybe KJ Britt in the 5th, just not really all that athletic, not a guy that I see playing much more than special teams. And Grant Stewart in the 7th is a special teams monster, or at least he projects that way. I don't know. The draft was decent, not a ton of bad or great picks here, just KJ Britt probably the one I'm the least high on. The Falcons had an upgrade to the Bucs, but kind of the same type where they didn't really do anything crazy great. They picked a number 4 overall and got a really, really good player. I like Richie Grant a lot. Jalen Mayfield's good value. The only guy I'm really not super high on at his draft spot is Darren Hall in the 4th round. Again, just seems a little bit early for him at the top of the 4th, but then with number 9 overall in the 4th, they took a stud potential starting center in a couple years. So really not a terrible draft class. I just think Darren Hall is a little early for him. Really not a bad class, though. The Tennessee Titans got a bunch of potential steals. I know Elijah Molden in the 3rd is definitely a big steal. Farley, we're going to have to see how he develops based on his big-time injury. Rashad Weaver just got arrested for assault, I believe, so that's not really that great. But I think Dez Fitzpatrick was their biggest reach in the draft. At the top of the 4th, again, it was just too early for a deep threat with questionable hands. Probably take a shot on him in the 6th or the 7th. It just seems a little bit early at the top of the 4th. But yeah, the Rashad Weaver, like, assault stuff, that could end up being pretty bad. And it was allegedly assaulting a woman. That's no good. But also, Rashad Weaver and Chaz Surratt, you could tell me this is the same guy based on these zoomed out pictures, and I go, yeah, it makes sense. Why do they look so similar? Listen, I'm tempted to say that the Texans' worst pick is Nico Collins just because they traded up so much to get him, but I like him as a player, so I'm not going to do that. Roy Lopez in the 6th, I think there are better D tackles available, and to take Roy Lopez, I don't think he's going to play a big impact for that team. I really don't. For the Indianapolis Colts, I'm a Texas Longhorns fan. I hate to do this, but I think the Colts' worst pick was Sam Ehlinger in the 6th, just because I don't think they need him. You could be high on Jacob Eason or not high on Jacob Eason. They have a young backup quarterback already. Why take Sam Ehlinger? I don't know. Listen, if you want to play him as like an H-back, develop him into a fullback, kind of gadget-type player as a less athletic, big Taysom Hill, sure, it's a bit of a project. Maybe you like him as a backup quarterback, but you have Jacob Eason there. You just traded for Carson Wentz. I don't know what Ellinger's value is. The Jacksonville Jaguars, this one's easy, man. Trevor Lawrence at number 1 overall. Talk about the biggest reach in the draft. No, that's fine. But I don't know. People are going to want me to say Travis Etienne. I don't hate the Travis Etienne pick. Thunder and lightning with James Robinson. Etienne is a better receiver out of the backfield than James Robinson is, and he offers way better speed. He's a really good change of pace back where you can keep defenses guessing and you don't give them a rest. James Robinson to really pound the rock. Etienne to give you a little bit more wide zone flexibility and as a big-time receiver out of the backfield. I like the Etienne pick. It was good value for it. They've got a good offensive line. People want to talk about the Jaguars now like their team is so terrible. How are you going to take a running back at the back end of the 1st round? The Jags have gotten a lot better. The Jags have a very solid offensive line. Look at Andrew Norwell. Look at Brandon Linder. That's left guard and center. A.J. Kahn is a solid starter at right guard. Jawan Taylor's developing well enough at right tackle. You have Cam Robinson, who you franchise tagged at left tackle. You got his potential replacement in Walker Little. I don't hate the Etienne pick. The Jags are a pretty solid team, or at least they're getting that way. Taking Etienne was fine. However, I think their worst pick was Tyson Campbell. Listen, Tyson Campbell is a fine player. Just at the very top of the 2nd round to take him when you didn't really need corner that badly. I love the fact that they got Andre Sisco at the top of the 3rd, kind of cancels it out. I would have loved to see them take safety here, even linebacker, even another tackle. They got Walker Little, though. Listen, I'm not really upset with like the pick overall. I think the Jags drafted fairly well. Just Tyson Campbell, another cornerback when they have Sidney Jones, who they re-signed. And they signed Shaq Griffin to a long-term deal. And you drafted C.J. Henderson at the top of the 1st last year. You didn't really need Tyson Campbell at 33. You just didn't. For the 49ers, he's going to end up playing a value. He's their next Raheem Mostert, I'm sure. But I like the rest of their class. Maybe you could say Diamador Lenore is the worst pick, but Elijah Mitchell in the 6th, I'm sure he's your next Raheem Mostert. I don't think any of these picks are particularly bad. I think Jalen Moore is good value. I think Ambry Thomas is good value. Trey Sermon is going to play a role for the team, so I don't hate it. I think he'll be their starting running back within 2 or 3 seasons. Elijah Mitchell is just another running back they drafted. Has great wheels. I'm sure he's their next Raheem Mostert. I'm positive of it. But I don't know what his impact is on the team long term. So I think he's probably their worst pick. Talanoa Hufanga is at least going to play special teams and be pretty good. I don't know. Elijah Mitchell, I guess. Eli Mitchell, they're calling him now. For this type of a video, the Seahawks are a really annoying team because they only had 3 picks, and you will not get me to say a bad word about Dwayne Eskridge. I love him as a player. I think he actually fits a team pretty well. Stone Forsythe in the 6th is a steal. Trey Brown in the 4th is pretty good value and a guy who fits the scheme really well. I'm going to go with Trey Brown. It's not a bad pick. Is it the worst one? Stone Forsythe is a steal. Dwayne Eskridge, I think, is really solid value in the 2nd and is going to play a big-time role for them. Could even be a really good return man at first. I can't say a bad word about either of those two, so by default, it's Trey Brown, even though I like the pick in the 4th. Whatever. The Seahawks, they annoy me with the only 3 picks. Who am I going to choose? So for the Arizona Cardinals, this one could come back to bite me really badly because he's a phenomenal athlete. Marco Wilson tested so unbelievably well, but really isn't a great technical corner at this point and has gotten worse every single year in coverage at Florida. So those are big time concerns. But if you can coach him up and develop him not only as an athlete, but as a football player, I'm sure Marco Wilson's going to be a stud. But it is a bit of a project because he's all athlete and no technical ability right now. But Marco Wilson to me is the worst pick. I like the rest of their draft a lot. Marco Wilson, it was just too early to take a guy that is bad at playing corner. With all due respect, he's just all athlete. Got torched at Florida this past year. I did not like the Rams draft. I really didn't. Their worst pick, in my opinion, was their first one, Tutu Atwell. You took a guy who is 150 pounds, not an exaggeration. He is, well, actually, you know what? He's 149 when he tested. He's pretty fast, not extraordinarily fast for someone that weighs 149 pounds. And Tutu Atwell, he's got solid hands. He doesn't really drop the football, but he also has no catch radius. So you have to put it on his body for him to even have a chance at making the catch. He's a deep threat and a deep threat only. And you might have huge durability concerns with a guy that's 5'7", 149. Why did you take Tutu Atwell when you needed offensive line and you needed slot cornerback and you needed linebacker? I know they went Ernest Jones later, but he's not as good as some of the guys on the board at 57 overall. Tutu Atwell, in my opinion, was a bad pick, and he could be a really good player for them. I'm sure Sean McVay is going to find a way to scheme him up, but wow, I don't like this pick at all. I know for the Raiders, everyone's going to want me to say Alex Leatherwood. If you can get a potential starting right tackle or potential starting right guard at number 17 overall, plug and play, it isn't the worst thing in the world, especially when they got Trayvon Merrick later in the 2nd round. To me, their worst pick in overall a solid draft class was Malcolm Kuntz. It was just too early for him. He's another great athlete. I know guys like Dane Brugler had him as a 7th round talent. So it's just too early to take Malcolm Kuntz. He's a big-time athlete. If you think you can develop him, great. The Raiders historically haven't been great at developing edge talent, except for like Max Crosby recently. I know Cleveland Ferrell is taking some steps, but Malcolm Kuntz as a rotational edge rusher, it's not the worst thing. It's just a big-time reach. The Chiefs are another team. They did quite well. It's tough to find a very bad pick. Had a bunch of steals, a bunch of great value pickups. I love Noah Gray. Cornell Powell in the 5th is awesome. Trey Smith is amazing value in the 6th if he can stay healthy. Creed Humphrey is your future starting center after Austin Blythe. After his 1-year contract's up is awesome. Nick Bolton can be a starting linebacker right away. Who does that leave? Joshua Kane, though. I had him as like a priority undrafted free agent or maybe 6th or 7th round pick just because he's a great athlete. Has gotten worse every year at Florida State. I think he can be a good player, and I think he's going to the right spot to get coached up, and he's a great athlete. I'm sure he'll be able to be developed. Just this was the worst pick out of a solid bunch. The Denver Broncos had a stacked draft. They had a stacked draft. Again, tough to find a bad pick. You could point to Pat Surtain because Justin Fields was on the board. I also know the Broncos think they're going to get Aaron Rodgers, so if that happens, you didn't really need Justin Fields. Trading up for Javonte Williams seems a little bit weird, but he's a stud. I really don't hate it, especially with Melvin Gordon being like 28, getting to that age of regression for running backs. So what was their worst pick? Probably Seth Williams, just because they really don't need more wide receiver talent. They have so many wide receivers. Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler, Cortland Sutton coming back. I know Tim Patrick's on a 1-year deal. Jerry Jeudy was a first-round pick last year. I like Seth Williams a lot as a player, and I think the 6th round is great value for him, but all of these picks are steals down the board, and Marquise Spencer's not so bad. He's going to play the least impact probably, so maybe it's Marquise Spencer. I like Seth Williams. They just really didn't need more receiver. I love their draft, so this is tough. And lastly, the Chargers also had a really stacked draft. So many great pickups, a lot of great value picks. Rashawn Slater at 13 is awesome. Asante Samuel Jr., as a great scheme fit at 47 is very solid. Josh Palmer is a deep threat. Trey McKitty, potential starting tight end, great athlete. Tough to find a really bad pick here. Nick Neiman's a phenomenal athlete. They took him in the 6th. Who's the worst one? Probably Mark Webb. I just see him playing the smallest impact for this team, but not a bad draft at all. Larry Roundtree in the 6th, I like as a change of pace, developmental running back. So it probably just has to be Mark Webb, but another really, really solid draft class. So that is going to do it for the video, guys. I know I just screamed so into the mic. Hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed already. More draft content to come, and then we'll get back into some of these rebuilds, seeing how these players might play in a simulation setting. So that's going to do it for me. Please subscribe. Check me out on Twitter. I stream every night on Twitch, twitch.tv/Bengal, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy. Every link is in the description.
I hit it at the park, bend bones. See me high step to the end zone. My life like a game, Nintendo. Playing with the best, let them know. Get off the track, the train's coming through. Yeah, promise you get in my way, then you best believe I'ma just run over you. Yeah, yeah. I'ma turn taking it back to the house. Defensive joke, I'm laughing so loud. Speedbird's good.